Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the amazing Regina Kim. Regina, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ken. How are you?
I am doing very well, and I'm so stoked to have you here. A woman of my own heart. Let's talk a little bit about you real quick. Regina is a Korean-American horror screenwriter who loves the challenges of finding new ways to scare the modern audience, which is awesome. You're not looking to just gross out and gore out. You're looking for ways to genuinely scare your audience, which I think is amazing. Your writing explores the dichotomy. I can't say that word at all. Dichotomy. I
Dichotomy.
can't. There you go.
Got it.
Dichotomy between not only Western and Korean cultures, but also the tangible and spiritual worlds and how Asian Americans exist within them. Now, obviously, the last couple of years have been a little rough for Asian Americans, and it's super unfortunate that it's come to that. Does that play into when you're writing? Does a lot of what's the recent ignorance play into the writing process for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, how could it not, right?
Right.
A lot of my writing sort of focuses on my experience growing up Korean American and sort of how I felt like I've had to live between the two worlds of my Korean heritage, but also my American upbringing, my very Western upbringing. And so that a lot of that goes into the writing. And so with the recent sort of anti-Asian hate crimes and even the Atlanta shootings last year, you really just have to be cognizant of what's going on in the world because I do think writing and horror especially taps into what's going on, socially, politically. And so it's important to have those messages.
hmm And it's unfortunate. I mean, some of the best writing can come from personal experience, especially the darkest of places. But it's unfortunate that you have to be scared to walk down the street because of what might be
Right.
thought of you or what people might say or do to you being an Asian American, male or female. It's
Right.
unfortunate that we're at a time in our lives where a global pandemic can get blamed on an American walking down the street.
Yeah.
Um, so for any type of prejudice you've endured, I'm sorry, and that goes for anybody in the Asian American community. It's unfair, and I'm so sorry that you've had to deal with this injustice. I mean, I know you, Regina, were in your lab going, "How can I make this COVID?" Like, come on, this is the stupidest shit
Yeah.
I've ever heard in my life. So,
Right.
um,
Right.
you also have written two horror features currently in development, and you're developing a TV series based on a drama feature. Now, here's my thing. With these things, can you talk about them right now? Or are they kind of like NDA'd under wraps type thing?
A little bit NDA under wraps things. Unless they get sort of announced to the trades, I feel like I should be on the safe side and not really go into details about the contents.
Right. And that's what I wanted to make sure. I didn't want to
Okay,
get your
cool.
ass in the
Yeah,
jackpot.
yeah,
So that's why
yeah.
I always wanted to ask beforehand.
Right.
But I do want to say you have the TV series that's based on the best-selling fantasy novel series, but you are also co-writing a drama feature, is what I was trying to say earlier, and I
Right.
ran ahead of myself there. Now, you graduated from UCLA MFA screenwriting program, and your horror TV pilot about sleep paralysis incubus was also on the 2019 Blood List. Like,
Right.
that's super awesome. And your comedy pilot Paramore was on the 20 was won first place in the 2020 UCLA Screenwriting Showcase. Now, what was that like for you? Something that you did, and obviously you write a lot of horror, but your comedy goes there and takes first place. What's that feel like for you?
Yeah, that was really surreal because, again, I am not a comedy writer at all. I would say I'm primarily a horror writer. And so it was just something that I had to do for grad school is, you have certain requirements, certain things you need to write in order to graduate. And one of them happened to be a comedy pilot because I took a half hour class. And it was very hard to write, and to be very honest with you, a lot of the credit goes to my workshop that quarter. I could not have done it without them because they are much funnier, much better people than I am at this. So to hear that it won was shocking. It was like, oh, maybe I can sort of branch out and do other types of works too.
Right. And I think that's something that we all kind of get nervous and scared about is we kind of get in our comfort zone, and leaving that comfort zone sometimes can be very anxious, cause a lot of anxiety. So I'm glad that this showed you that you do have the chops to not just stay in the horror genre, but you do have what it takes to expand a little bit. Now, before we get into the reason why we're here, I've been so blessed the last couple of interviews to be able to talk about something that means so much to me besides horror. And let's talk about your favorite season, and that is baseball season. Now,
Yes.
everybody that knows me knows I love horror. I love baseball. So talk a little bit about baseball here for a second. Obviously, it looks like the season is going to be delayed a little bit, but when did you become a baseball fan?
Oh, wow. I mean, I honestly can't remember. It's been so long. I'd like to say I was a baseball fan just like coming out of the womb, even though that's probably not true. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I am an Oakland A's fan. I was born in Oakland, raised in Alameda, which is a very small town right next to Oakland. And, my earliest memory was always just, back then, right? Our play outside thing was like you go to the park and then you do a pickup soccer game, or you go out with a mitt and you play catch with your friends. So that's what I did growing up, and I was always drawn to baseball. Played baseball throughout, growing up, elementary school, middle school, high school. I did varsity softball for 4 years in high school, and always loved watching baseball on TV. And at that time, my dad was really the one who sort of introduced me to the sport. And he always had either a Giants game on or an A's game on, depending on the day. And I was always just drawn to the A's more. I thought they were the better teams. I still believe they are. I'm very biased, obviously. But I think it had to do with that time period too, because that was like early 2000s, and that was sort of the great A's team in my mind. That was Moneyball A's team. That was Eric Chavez and Miguel Tejada and Mark Ellis and Scott Hatterberg. That was sort of my team growing up. So I loved it since I was a kid, and that has continued obviously to this day.
As long as you don't hit a ground ball in Hattie's direction,
Right.
you'll be just fine.
Oh God, yeah. He did hit the home run to win it, the 20th game though. So
yeah.
made up for that.
I mean, like we talk about Moneyball, and that's my son. He's 13. That's his favorite movie. And that's genuinely one of my favorite parts of the movie, when he goes up to Hattie and he's like, "What's your biggest fear?" And he's like, "A baseball getting hit in my general direction." He's like, "Oh, but seriously," he's like, "Yes, seriously. It's the ball getting in my direction." Like, it's such a great movie. And one thing I love to talk about with baseball is now the inclusion of women to the sport. You have Kim Ng, who is, the general manager out there in Miami. Even though neither one of us are huge fans, the Yankees did just hire a female manager in the minor league systems. We have a lot of female hitting coaches. And I just had this conversation on an episode I recently did, but it's amazing that baseball, which is such an old school, unwritten rule sport, is so open to the inclusion of women becoming a major part of the game. And it makes me so proud as a baseball fan, as someone that was raised by a single mother, as someone that has two daughters, that's been with his wife since high school, to see this sport that I sometimes get so angry with because of unwritten rules and old school tactics, really opening up and embracing, let's choose the best person for the job, not the best man. Let's get the best person that can come out here and make our ball club better. Now, as a female that is so in love with the sport, what does that mean to you to see the inclusion of so many great women into the sport?
Right. Yeah, I mean, as a minority, as a part of a minority group, I think you will always be somewhat excluded from sort of the bigger organizations. And, I think it's a step. I think we're progressing slowly, and especially in an organization like MLB. I would love to see more of it, over the years. I truly hope that sort of, like our kids' generations or their kids' generations, it won't be such a big topic of conversation, right? Like, oh my gosh, we have a woman hitting coach or a woman manager. Like, hopefully it's just so part of the culture, and it's just so ingrained that we don't have to be like, she was the first, or, he was the first of this. So that's the hope. But, obviously I think all of this takes time, and it's a process. So it's definitely great to see it slowly get there.
Yeah. And like you said, you got to start somewhere. Eventually people look, and it doesn't matter where you sit on the bus. All these things have to start somewhere. And I'm glad that our generation gets to watch the start of this. And I agree with you. I would love for my kids and my grandkids to just be like, hey, you got a female third base coach. Hey, you got a female pitcher. Hey, you got a female manager. And it doesn't mean anything. It's just another part of the game to them. So I completely agree with you there. So I know a lot of you came here to watch horror, but if I get the chance to talk baseball, I'm going to take that chance for a second. So.
I will too. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Regina, I am so happy to have you here and talk about this. But let's move on to the reason why we're here. You said that you're not really sure when you started being a baseball fan. You came out of the womb with the mid on, ready to throw 90 on the black. So that we don't know, but we do know where horror started for you. So now I want to go back to the past and talk
Right.
about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Regina, your first horror movie was?
So this is a full disclosure. I know we're going to talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre here today, and I am
Mhm.
excited for that. Um, the first ever I actually watched was The Exorcist, but I have talked my ass off about The Exorcist on previous, guest spots and interviews. So I thought I'd go with the second horror movie I watched. I'm sorry for messing up anything if that. But yes, we are here to talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So for the purposes of this, that was the first horror movie I ever watched.
Let's do it. Let's run it because I love me some barbecue. And
Oh my
so I am
God,
so
that is
down
great.
to talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with you. Now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a film that I think really does. It was really ahead of its time because people look at that movie as a slasher, and it really isn't. To me, this is more of an art film than it is a
Yeah.
slasher. But do you remember, Regina, about how old you were the first time you had seen it?
Oh man, I was a teenager, maybe 12 or 13.
Mhm.
So it got me. It got me really badly. And I agree. I don't really see it as a slasher. I mean, I do. I see sort of, the tropes of that. But I remember the first time I watched it, I was just like, this is I don't know, something about the realism of it too. And I know we can get into that in a little bit, but the realism of just like you're out in rural Texas, you come across a house, and then everybody there is trying to kill you and they're cannibals. It was just so frightening to me.
And it's funny because we talk about how like you said, there's cannibals, there's a guy with a chainsaw that wears people's faces. But if you watch the movie, this movie is so damn beautiful. The way
Yeah.
that it's shot, the cinematography,
Yes.
everything is so genuine and so beautiful. I think that's why this movie really has stood the test of time because it's such a beautiful film. It's very artsy. I mean, even from the bones that they use to hang in there, everything's genuine. It's all real,
Right.
which is gross to think about, but it's beautiful to see. Now, this is a movie I could talk forever about because it means a lot to me, and it was so effective to me on first visit too. For the longest
Mm.
time, this was one of my favorite horror movies. Still up there, but what scene would you say, Regina, affected you the most from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Yeah, I have to go with two. The first is obviously the dinner scene, and anyone who's seen it understands exactly why. I think just the helplessness of the situation and how people are just sort of like mocking you and then are gonna eat you and drink your blood was really terrifying to me. And so that image has stuck with me just throughout the years. And then the second scene is just the long chase through the woods when Sally is trying to run away from the house. She gets out, and then you just see Leatherface chase her through the woods for like a literal 10 minutes of the movie until she's back in. And it scared me because usually, right, like today, those chase scenes are quicker, or something happens where you have to cut it off. But just to see the whole, again, helplessness of her running through the woods in the middle of nowhere, the isolation and the dread that comes with that, knowing she's probably not going to escape, was another sort of scene that really shook me.
And I want to jump back here for 1 second. I will talk about the chase scene here in a second, but with the dinner scene, what a heavy scene. And you
Yeah.
watched the behind the scenes, and it was so hot in there. They had to take
Mhm.
breaks for Gunner to puke. I mean, he was throwing up
Oh
because he
my
was so
God.
hot. And
Wow.
the meat was literally rotting. So you had the stench and the heat, and people were getting sick. And that's dedication to your craft because they wanted this movie to come out as great as it did. And that to me is legit one of the scariest scenes in cinema history.
Hmm.
And you get them talking about Grandpa's the best at killing, bring Grandpa in
Yeah.
here. And like you said, that helplessness. You've watched your friends, your brother die,
Yeah.
and now you're trapped. And Sally Hardesty, the lungs on that lady,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
Right.
Like that is amazing. And you feel a genuine fear, and she's talked openly about how everybody treated her so wonderfully.
Mm.
And in between takes, everybody was laughing and joking and trying to keep their spirits up, and which
Uh-huh.
is great to hear, because especially back then you didn't get that a lot. You know, people were
Right.
pretty shitty on sets, but she said she was so respected and so taken care of, which is awesome to hear. But the amount of physical and emotional work that she put into this film makes her one of my favorite final girls of all time.
Mm. Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah. Oh, the physicality that she brings,
Yeah,
the emotional
that's
distress
true.
that she has throughout the movie. I think it's amazing. It's such an underrated performance in the history of
Right.
horror, because you get your Nancy's, your Sidney Prescott's, you get your Laurie Strode's, which all deserve the credit. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to bring
Right,
them
right,
down,
right, right.
but she's never included in these conversations, and I think she was
That's
absolutely
true.
wonderful in those scenes.
That's true,
Um,
especially for a film that sort of launched all the other slasher films out there. Because I believe it was this one and then Halloween, right? So this was sort of like one of the first final girls in this genre.
right, and the one that survived. Like she
Right.
made it. At the end, you got her laughing on the truck because she's just so almost delirious of what
Yeah.
just happened, and it's amazing
Right.
to see her get away. So this brings me to my next question. At the time of filming, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022 has not been released yet.
Right.
Um, by the time you guys are watching this, it's been released, so maybe you can have your opinions on it. What is your excitement level for this? Is this something you're excited about, or?
Yeah, I'm still excited about it, and this is coming from someone who loves this series a lot. So, every year I like to do sort of the rewatch of all of them, all the sequels, even the remake that happened. I don't even remember the year, 20 something. But yeah, I am excited, and I think it's mostly because you get to see the return of Sally, and that's the biggest thing that I'm excited about, and sort of how they're going to tell that story. Much like I was excited for the new Halloween in 2018, and sort of how they brought Laurie back in such a central role, and all her trauma that she has to deal with now that she's older, what it means for her family, and sort of the generational trauma that has gone on. So I'm very curious to see how they deal with something like that in this new one.
And that's what I'm excited about. Let's get rid of that, kind of like what Halloween 2018 did. Let's get rid of every sequel. Let's go right
Yeah,
from the original to this one and tell the
right,
story that we've been waiting for 40 years, to see what happened to her. We never got that closure on her
right,
story. So
right.
to finally see, and she's ready, the trailer, I think I'm not the biggest franchise fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think there's a lot of lows in this
Yeah.
franchise.
Oh yeah.
Um,
But they're
but
fun. That's the main
they are
thing.
fun,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I'm excited to see her and Leatherface lock eyes again. Like, that's something that I'm over the
Mm.
moon. And by the time you guys have watched this, future Ken may be happy or sad that he just said that. But this Ken right now is so excited for this film, and I can't wait for it to happen. So we talked about which scene affected you the most, Regina, but let me ask you this, and it's kind of hard to ask this because it's such a dark film, but what would you say your favorite scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would be?
Yeah, that is a very hard question to answer because whatever my answer is, people are going to be like, "She's weird." I guess
Love
if
when
I
he
had,
hangs around the
yeah,
hook. It's so much fun.
I was just about to say that. And that's why I was like, oh, I don't know if I should say it, but I do have to say that's my favorite because of the suspense, like how they
Yeah.
built suspense up to that first kill is what I loved about it. And anything where I can feel that uneasiness and the unsettling atmosphere. I love, and that's why I love horror films today too, because they do such a good job sort of just building suspense, building dread over time, and that's how I felt right before we got to the first kill, and just the fact that with that first kill, they don't overly right, they don't overdo the gore or anything like that. There's not like fountains of blood coming out. It's so simple in a way. It's like hang on a meat hook and she dies.
Yep.
So something like that, just the simplicity of that scene too is why I would say that's my favorite.
And what you just said, something you just brought up that I so love and I adore. There's really not a lot of blood and guts in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When
Yeah,
people think about it, like people, I think, we obviously it's something human nature. Like when I watched this as a kid, I think I put in dots and I connected dots that weren't actually there. Cause I always remember this
yeah,
as like a gory, nasty slasher. Like, oh my
yeah,
God, that movie's brutal. Then you go back to
absolutely.
watch it, you're like, no, it isn't. Like, it's so good. Like, it's such a great film. And it's not a bunch of blood and guts and gore. They scared you with the suspense and almost the Hitchcockian, I'll show you
Mm.
the shadow of what's happening and let you use your
Yeah.
imagination of what's really happening here. And I think that's
Right.
amazing. I
Mm.
love that filmmaking. You don't need to depend on blood and guts to scare your audience. You scare
Right.
your audience with suspense, and that's something you are trying to master. And I think it's amazing that that's something that you, as like you said earlier, a minority writer, minority director, you're really nailing. I want to scare people. I don't want to gross them out. I want to scare them.
Yeah, it's the
I want
psychological thing, you know? And even
right.
as a kid watching this, I remember just psychologically being affected and the fear, the psychology of fear. And
Mhm.
it's weird because I totally agree with you because you said you sort of remembered this as like a very bloody, gory movie. I remember this as a black and white movie. And then I watched it as like a college student and I was like, wait, they filmed this in color? Like I totally remember this being black and white. And it was just so
Mhm.
weird. And I wonder if, yeah, like the Hitchcockian effect had anything to do with that. But
Right.
it's so interesting what like memory and your brain can
Mhm.
do to you.
See, and this is something I wanted to ask you too, and we're getting to that part of the interview here. Um, Obviously, like you said, you like to, as a director, as a writer, your goal is to scare people, not gross them out, just to psychologically scare people. Now, we talked to you, obviously, The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre really started your horror life, and these are both psychologically
Yeah.
scarring movies.
Yeah.
Do you think that these two movies, starting your horror life, do you think that's the reason that you kind of want that psychological horror rather than a gross out, God, I hate to say it, torture porn type of horror? Do you think the reason you are more of a psychological suspense horror type of person is because of how horror started for you?
Absolutely. I think that has a lot to do with it because if I'd watched I don't know, like Hostel first, like I wonder how different my writing would be if I had
Mhm.
responded to something like that or Saw, right? But because
Right.
I'd seen two movies very early on that were so psychological, I think it has a lot to do with sort of what I write today and why I write it, because a lot of my writing focuses on how do you scare people, kind of like you said, right in the shadows or with this or
Yeah.
that, instead of just outright blood and guts. And just the fact that you can put so much of your own subtext and messages, you know, a lot of my work focuses on like topics that are important to the Asian American community or in the Asian community. So yeah, is I think it definitely has something to do with that.
And that big thing, the fear of the unknown. What you can't see is even scarier than what you can. And
Yeah.
I should have said this during the first act of the interview, guys, but now we're at the second act. And if you want to know more about Regina's writing, all her social media links are down here in the description. So all you gotta do is click these social media links and give her a follow. Make sure you're checking her out. I promise you, she's amazing on social media. That's how we were able to connect. She's very proud of her work, and I'm very proud of her work. So you should definitely give her a follow so you can stay up to date on everything she's doing. She's got 2 titles coming out that she can't talk about yet, but when she can, you'll be the first to know by following these links down here. So we kind of touched on this question already, but I want to really put it out there. When it comes to the kills in horror movies, I think it's something that we all enjoy, and not in a perverse type of way, but we go into it for the drama and the horror. Like that's the suspense, and that's the kills are something that really sticks with us. Now, I hate saying favorite because that is quite dark, but what kill from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would you say stuck with you the most?
Oh my gosh. Besides the meat hook, because that one, you
Yeah.
know, that one's sort of the one straight on my mind. Oh gosh. You got I haven't seen it in a while. You got to remind me how Franklin died.
See, and I was gonna say you got Franklin with the, like
Yeah.
he's always been mine because for me, like Franklin is a character that I absolutely love to
Yeah.
hate because
Mm.
he's funny, but at the same time, when you got him in the car, like you're like, oh my god, this is really like your little brother that's driving you
Yeah,
fucking
yeah, yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
So
Right, right.
I definitely understand that too. And I would have to go with Franklin too. And
Mm.
because you think he's safe, like, oh, he's in a wheelchair, he's safe.
Right,
They're
right,
not
right,
gonna
right.
hurt him. And then you get that at the end. So now I do want to flip it on you here a little bit, Regina. We talked about your first horror movie and what that movie means to you being the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But now my little buddy Ghostface has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Regina? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Of all time, besides this one
Mhm.
and besides The Exorcist?
Yeah, yep, just your favorite, not your first,
Oh
your
my
absolute
gosh.
favorite.
His favorite. That's so hard. I have so many.
I think that comes
Ah,
down to there's so many different subgenres of horror.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just
That's what I
lock
was just
down
thinking.
one
Yeah.
favorite is that, and
Okay.
that's why I never tell anybody I'm going to ask them this question because I don't want you to think about it. I just want that answer off the seat of your
Yeah.
pants.
Okay. Just if I'm just going with it, I'm gonna go with Paranormal Activity, the first one.
Oh, great choice.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that when I didn't really realize found footage was like a genre that you could sort of delve into, and it caught me, the first time I think I even watched that in theaters, but that one really got me, and I couldn't sleep for a very, very long time. So I'm gonna go with that one. I'm sure if you ask me tomorrow, it'll be something different, but
Oh,
today, sitting here right here with you, I'm going with Paranormal Activity.
and that's what I love about this is horror is so entranced in our blood that we can have a different favorite every day.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I mean, 99% of the time, I'm going to tell you it's House from 1986.
Oh,
Um,
that's a good one. Oh,
that was my
okay.
first horror movie. Like that movie really has such a soft spot with me. I think it's a little bit of everything. It's a war story, it's a horror story, it's a
Yeah.
love story. Like it's everything, and I love it so
Mm.
much. But now, guys, we are at the third act, and the credits are about to roll here in a little bit. So we always end this with the same question, Regina. We're going to go back to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and what we're going to do now is rank this on a skull count.
Mm.
However, we're not being critics. We're not judging it on production, score, art design, acting, none of the above. What we're doing here is strictly judging this movie on how much it affected you on first viewing. So, zero skulls
Mm.
being not effective, five being very effective. You
Mm.
can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the
Mm.
middle. What would your ranking of Texas Chainsaw Massacre be?
If I went back, in the depths of my memory of sort of like my first time watching this, I have to go with five. I have to go
Got
with
you.
five. It got me so badly. So I'm going five. Yeah, there you go.
No, and that's what I love. That's why I want to do it on how it affects us because
Yeah.
obviously, if we're going on a critic standpoint, I can't give anything a five. I just
Right,
can't.
right,
To me,
right,
there
right.
is no such thing as the perfect movie, but
Yeah.
there are many movies that affected me up to a five. So that's why I
Yeah.
like that so much better.
Yeah, yeah.
I-
I do have to say if I could give five skulls, as a critic, I have to go with Parasite. Like I think that is the
mhm.
perfect movie. So that one, even as a how it affected me and as a critic and as a fan of movies, I'm going five skulls for something like Parasite.
Parasite's a great movie, and I think that it's an underrated movie. And um, it just sucks that you have a lot of the mainstream that doesn't get into horror. Horror is still kind of like that taboo thing, so they don't get to watch these movies and appreciate them the way that we do. And it's such an
Yeah.
unfortunate thing,
Yeah.
And Parasite is one that you're on the edge of your seat the whole time.
Yeah.
What
I mean, the
what are
first
we?
half is like a comedy, and then all of a sudden the doorbell rings and you're like, what the hell? What is this
Boom.
movie? And it turns into almost a horror movie at that point.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it. That the shifting seasons almost in the film. So I do again want to say thank you so much for joining us, Regina. This has been so amazing. And now that we're at the end of the third act, the credits see they're about to roll. Social media links down here in the description, guys. So please make sure you're clicking them. Give her a follow so you can stay up to date on everything that she has coming up. Regina, please don't go anywhere. I have a couple more questions for you.
Gotcha.
Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.